She turned to me and said my name, but it wasn't her voice. It was my grandmother's. Soft, steady, worn with age. The kind of voice that used to hum lullabies through the kitchen as a pot simmered on the stove, or read bedtime stories with each word soaked in comfort. My grandmother had a rhythm to her voice, a cadence shaped by decades of living. I knew it like I knew my own heartbeat. And she was dead, gone for 2 years, laid to rest on a rainy afternoon, surrounded by lilies and silence. I remember the way the air felt that day. Still, final, as if the whole world had agreed to stop for her. And yet, somehow, I heard her voice again, spoken by someone who should never have been able to summon it. Emma, my best friend, the one I trusted with everything, the one who had held my hand at the funeral and whispered that grief comes in waves. The same Emma who never even met my grandmother in person, who had only seen her in photographs, smiling, frozen in time. It was a quiet moment, one of those late afternoons when the sun casts long shadows on the walls and the light feels more gold than bright. We were sitting in my room, not doing much of anything. I was reading. She was staring out the window. Then, without looking at me, she said my name, and every part of me went still, because I recognized the voice immediately. Not just the tone, the breath between syllables, the way the A curled in my name, exactly how my grandmother used to say it when she was disappointed or trying to get my attention without raising her voice. I waited for Emma to laugh, to say she was joking, to ask if I'd noticed her impression, but she just blinked slowly and turned the page of the book in her lap like nothing unusual had happened. That's when something shifted in me. You know those moments when you feel like you've stepped into a memory you don't recognize? When something seems off, but there's no clear reason. It was like that, like watching a familiar scene unfold with one critical piece replaced. You can't name it right away, but the feeling sits deep in your chest, unmoving. I asked her to repeat herself. She looked confused, said she hadn't said anything at all, smiled, shrugged, went back to her book, and I forced a smile in return, but something cold had already wrapped itself around my spine, because I knew what I heard, and I knew that voice didn't belong to her. After that, I started paying closer attention to her pauses, her laughter, the way she said certain phrases, like she was remembering how they were supposed to sound instead of actually feeling them. I started listening more than I spoke, and the more I listened, the more I realized how many moments I'd ignored, how many details I'd brushed off. Small things at first, a strange tone here, a word choice there, times when she seemed to speak from a place that wasn't entirely her own. Of course, I try to rationalize it. That's what we do. We don't want to believe that something's wrong, that the people we love might not be exactly who we think they are. We tell ourselves it's stress, fatigue, maybe something we misheard, a trick of memory. But some truths don't stay buried. Some things once noticed can't be unheard. And that voice, that one slip, echoed in my mind for days, until I realized I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have, because I remembered every inflection, every sound. And no matter how many times I replayed it in my mind, there was no version of reality in which it made sense. That was the moment I understood something had changed. That Emma wasn't alone anymore. And neither was I, because if a voice could return without a body, if something could speak through her without her even realizing it, then who or what was truly sitting across from me? And if it could borrow one voice, what else could it take? What's lurking in the shadows when your friend's voice isn't her own? Emma and I had been friends since the first semester of college. We met during orientation, two strangers assigned to the same group for a campus scavenger hunt. She was the kind of person you notice right away, but not because she was loud or flashy. Emma had this quiet charm, the kind that draws you in without asking for attention. She had a warm laugh, the kind that made people lean in when she spoke. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She wasn't a mysterious one in our friend group. If anything, Emma was a grounding force, dependable. She remembered birthdays without reminders, always carried extra snacks, and never missed a deadline. She wasn't impulsive or dramatic. She hated confrontation, and when the rest of us spiraled into chaos during finals week, she was the one brewing tea and reminding us to breathe. There wasn't anything strange about her. That's what made everything harder to understand later. We lived in a sleepy college town, just wide enough to get lost in for an hour, small enough to run into someone you knew at the grocery store. Our apartment was just off campus. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, paper-thin walls. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We decorated it with string lights and secondhand art prints, and Emma insisted on keeping a bowl of fresh lemons on the counter, though I never saw her use them. Most nights were quiet. Homework, streaming shows, takeout when we were too tired to cook. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady, comfortable, familiar. That's why I noticed when the shift began. It wasn't dramatic. There was no one moment that screamed something's wrong. It started small. Emma would zone out in the middle of a conversation. We'd be talking about something simple, weekend plans, a professor's weird assignment, and she'd just stop. Her eyes would fix on a spot behind me or past a window, and she wouldn't blink for a few seconds longer than felt normal. I'd pause and wait for her to come back. Usually, she would. She'd shake her head and smile like nothing had happened. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone gets tired. Everyone spaces out. It wasn't worth mentioning. Then came the other things. Things she said that didn't sound like her. I remember one night in particular. We were sitting on the couch, watching a documentary, something about deep-sea creatures. Emma wasn't really paying attention, just scrolling on her phone like she usually did. Then out of nowhere, she said, "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to forget who you are?" I turned to look at her. It wasn't the question that startled me. It was the way she said it. The tone was flat, uncurious, like she wasn't asking out of reflection or wonder, but from experience. I asked her to repeat it. She blinked, confused. "I didn't say anything," she replied. I told her what I'd heard. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual laugh. It was short, clipped. Why would I say that? That's not something I'd ever say. She looked genuinely puzzled, almost embarrassed. And maybe she was right. Maybe I misheard. But the phrase stuck in my mind like a stone lodged in my shoe. No matter how I turned it over, it didn't sit right. After that, these moments became more frequent. She'd forget details from conversations we just had, or she'd repeat something in exactly the same way, as if reading from a script she didn't remember writing. And sometimes, her expressions didn't match the words. She'd say she was fine, but her eyes looked tired in a way I couldn't explain. Or she'd laugh at something before I'd even finished a sentence, like she already knew the punchline. One night, she got up in the middle of dinner. No warning, no explanation. Just stood up, walked to a window, and stared out into the dark. When I asked what she was looking at, she turned slowly and said, "They're almost here." Then she blinked, shook her head, and asked if we had any soy sauce. I wanted to believe she was joking, playing around, but her voice had been different. Not the voice of someone making a joke, or even trying to scare me. It was plain, like stating a fact. And the way she asked for the soy sauce after, as if nothing had happened, felt more confusing than anything else. I asked her once if she was okay. "Really okay?" She smiled, told me I was overthinking, that I needed to get more sleep. And maybe she was right. But sometimes, I'd find her awake in the kitchen at 3 a.m., just sitting at the table in the dark. No phone, no book, just staring at nothing. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say she couldn't sleep, that her dreams felt too loud. Emma never used to say things like that. And the more I listened, the more I started to realize this wasn't the same person I'd known. Not entirely. She looked like Emma. She still remembered my favorite tea, still sent me memes and asked how my day was. But there were cracks now, little fractures in the day-to-day rhythm. And though she never said it outright, I began to wonder if she was afraid of something, or someone, or maybe of herself. Whatever it was, I knew this wasn't just stress, or burnout, or anything I could explain away. Something had changed, and it wasn't stopping. It happened on a Friday. Emma had come over for a sleepover, something we hadn't done in months. maybe years. We were adults now, technically, but sometimes it felt good to act like we weren't. To stay up too late, eat junk food, rewatch the movies we loved in high school, pretend just for a night that nothing had changed. She was quieter than usual that evening, but I didn't question it. I figured she was tired, or maybe just lost in thought. She smiled when I handed her a blanket, thanked me when I passed the popcorn. Her presence felt normal. Her laugh still sounded like her laugh. By midnight, we were both half asleep on the living room floor, surrounded by pillows and the glow of the TV. I must have drifted off sometime after 1. When I woke up, the clock on the stove read 2:33 a.m. At first, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. Everything was still. The room was dim, the only light a faint wash from outside the window. No noise, no movement. Then I heard it, a voice, muffled, low. It was coming from the other side of the room. Emma. At first, I thought she was talking in her sleep. She'd never done that before, but people pick up weird habits. I almost ignored it. Then I listened closer. He's almost here. Her voice was strained, tight, like the words were dragging themselves out of her mouth. He's behind the tree. I sat up. There was something wrong with the way she sounded. Not just the tone, the actual voice. It wasn't hers. It was deeper, slower, like her vocal cords were being pulled through cold water. And her face. Her face wasn't right. Her eyes were shut, but her brow was pulled low, mouth twisted like she was stuck in some kind of inner struggle. Her hands clenched at her sides, her body rigid. She didn't look asleep. She looked trapped inside something she couldn't shake off. I called her name. Once. Then again, louder. She didn't respond. So I reached out and shook her shoulder. Her eyes flew open. She gasped, flinching like I'd thrown ice water on her. For a moment, she looked completely disoriented, like she didn't recognize where she was, or who I was. Then she blinked again, and her whole body softened. "Did I fall asleep?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, you were dreaming, I think." She stretched, rubbed her eyes. "What time is it?" I didn't answer. I was still staring at her. "Emma, do you remember what you said just now?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You were talking in your sleep. You said something like, 'He's behind the tree.'" She stared at me for a moment, then laughed quietly. "Okay, creepy, but I have no idea why I'd say that." Then came the line I was starting to hear more and more from her. "That's not something I'd say." She smiled again, tried to brush it off. I didn't push, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, everything seemed fine. Ordinary, even. We made coffee, ate leftover muffins, talked about weekend plans. Emma looked rested, maybe more than usual. I tried not to think about the voice, the way it didn't match her mouth, the words that didn't belong to her. But I couldn't stop turning it over in my head. Later that day, around 5 in the afternoon, I got a voice note from her. No text, just a message. I was in the kitchen when it came through. I remember hitting play, half distracted, expecting some joke or random thought. Instead, I heard a voice, but it wasn't hers, not even close. It was deep, hoarse, and calm in a way that made my skin tense, like someone trying very hard to speak clearly, someone unused to using vocal cords. The message was only 4 seconds long, but I remember every word. You shouldn't have woken her. That was it. 4 seconds, then silence. My stomach dropped. I listened again. Or I tried to, because the second time I hit play, there was nothing, just static, no words, no voice. I stared at the waveform on the screen. Tried again, still static. I called her. She answered like everything was normal, like nothing strange had happened. I asked about the voice note. She didn't know what I was talking about. Said she hadn't sent one. Said she'd been at the library all afternoon, barely on her phone. I checked the message again. It was still there, still marked from her number, still 4 seconds, still useless. I didn't know what to say. So I told her not to worry, that I'd probably misheard. We hung up a few minutes later, and I sat there, phone in my hand, wondering who or what had used her voice, or borrowed it, and why that voice had known I was there. It didn't stop with the voice note. I kept telling myself it was a glitch, some strange overlap, a corrupted message. Phones mess up all the time, right? It's not unheard of, but the feeling it left behind, that hum beneath my skin, never really went away. I tried to keep things normal between us after that. It was easier at first. We were both busy. Exams were coming up, deadlines, projects. Life moved forward whether I wanted it to or not. Emma and I still saw each other, but mostly in passing. Short texts, quick meetups for coffee, group study sessions with too much noise and not enough focus. And then things started to change. Not all at once. At first, it felt like a string of disconnected moments. Incidents that didn't seem big on their own. Just little blips, barely worth mentioning. But together, they started forming something I couldn't ignore. It was during a group study session when I heard it again. We were in the campus library, sharing a table with 3 others. The hum of voices, the scratching of pens on paper, the occasional sigh or cough. Emma had been quiet most of the time, reading, then she looked up and spoke. But the words she said weren't part of our conversation. They weren't even part of the subject we were studying. She said my name, and then she said something else. A sentence, a specific one. It was from my childhood, a line my mother used to whisper to me when I had nightmares. One I hadn't heard in over a decade. No one else would have known it. Certainly not Emma. I stared at her, but she just looked back down at her book, like she hadn't spoken at all. I asked her later, quietly after we left. She laughed. That? I was just quoting something I read. Sounded poetic. Sorry if it freaked you out. But the thing is, she didn't read poetry. She never had. It wasn't her thing. And the exact wording, it was too precise. It didn't stop there. A few days later, we were sitting outside the cafe near campus, having lunch. Just the 2 of us. It was quiet, peaceful. She was talking about something. Classes, I think, when her voice shifted mid-sentence. Like someone else had picked up the thread and carried it forward. The tone was flatter, the rhythm unfamiliar. She said the name of my grandfather. Then she described something I'd never told anyone. A moment from my family's past. Something that happened years ago, before I was born. Something only my parents would have known. And she said it like it meant nothing. When I asked how she knew, she blinked slowly, then shrugged. I don't remember saying that. She looked away, stared at a tree across the street, like it was the most interesting thing in the world. And I felt, for the first time, completely alone with her. Not because she wasn't talking to me, but because something else was. People started asking questions. My roommate, Anna, pulled me aside after class one day. Hey, is your friend Emma okay? I asked what she meant. She was standing outside the building the other day, just staring at the ground. She didn't look present. I brushed it off, said she'd been tired. But Anna looked unconvinced. It wasn't just that. She was talking to herself, or someone I couldn't see. Others started noticing, too. Noticing that she would say strange things under her breath. That her reactions weren't always appropriate. That her eyes didn't always match her words. And the drawing started. First it was in her notebook. I saw it during study group. At first glance, it looked like doodling, lines, swirls, loops. But the more I looked, the more intentional it seemed. The shapes repeated themselves, over and over, like a language, or a map. I asked her what it was. She covered the page with her hand and said, just keeping my hands busy. But the symbols kept appearing, on napkins, on the corners of her seats, on the back of her class notes, always the same ones. And then she started speaking in something I didn't recognize. Not often, just a phrase here and there, whispered, half-sung. I recorded one of them once, played it back, sent it to a professor of mine who specialized in ancient languages. He said it sounded like a mix of several, fragments from Latin, Old Greek, maybe even something older. He couldn't identify all of it. He asked where I'd heard it. I said I didn't know. But I did. One evening, after walking her home, she paused at her doorstep. She turned to me, her hand still on the key, and said, "He's in the corners. Don't look too long." I laughed nervously, but she didn't. She just stared at me, eyes clear, unblinking. Then just like that, she went inside. Didn't say goodnight. Didn't look back. I stood there for a while, longer than I meant to. And when I finally turned to go, I did exactly what she told me not to do. I looked, and I don't know what I expected to see. But for a moment, just a moment, I had the distinct, bone-deep certainty that something had been watching us. Not from across the street, not from the windows, but from the space between the spaces. The kind of place you never notice until someone tells you it's there. And then you can't stop noticing. I couldn't just leave it alone anymore. Not after everything Emma had said. Not after what I saw in her eyes that night. Something was wrong. With her, around her. And the worst part, the part one didn't want to say out loud, was that whatever it was starting to notice me too. I wasn't sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard fragments, not full sentences, just whispers. Sometimes familiar, sometimes not. But once, just once, I heard my own voice say my name, and I wasn't dreaming. So I started looking for answers, not in the usual places. Google was useless. The explanations were always clinical. Parasomnia, dissociative states, attention-seeking behaviors. Nothing explained the things she said, the things only I should have known. So I dug deeper. I went to the library, not the universities, but the towns, the older building with the cracked windows and yellowing archives. I asked the reference librarian if they had anything on folklore, sleep speaking, voice phenomena. She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, just pointed me toward the back. There were only a few books. Most of them were dusty, out of print, and more focused on local ghost stories than anything serious. But one of them, half forgotten, bound in worn blue leather, mentioned something called Vox Hollow. It wasn't a chapter. It was a footnote, just a single paragraph. But once I read it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It said, "There are tales passed quietly in this valley of a thing that does not speak in its own voice. It remembers what it hears. It waits. It wears voices like coats. And when it speaks in yours, you belong to it more than you know. No author, no date, just that." I photocopied the page and took it with me. When I asked around, older faculty, longtime residents, most people shrugged it off, said I'd been reading too many stories. But there was one person who didn't laugh. Mr. Lane, the maintenance guy on campus. He overheard me asking someone in the faculty lounge. Later that day, he found me near the bike racks. Said, "If you really want to know about that, go talk to Miss Ray. She lives near the old train tracks. Everyone's forgotten her, but she remembers everything." So I did. It took me 2 days to work up the courage. Her house sat alone on a slope street, windows lined with thick curtains. The kind of place that felt like it never fully belonged in this century. She didn't answer at first, but when she did, her eyes locked onto mine in a way that made it clear she knew why I'd come. "You've heard it," she said, not as a question. I nodded. Nodded, exactly. I said, "But I've heard things. From someone close to me. Things they shouldn't know. And you heard yourself too, didn't you?" she interrupted. And I stopped breathing for a second. "Yes." She opened the door wider and stepped aside. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves. Not books, at least not mostly. Boxes, old reels, cassette tapes labeled in shaky handwriting, journals, photographs. She poured tea, but I barely touched mine. She said the word again, Vox Hollow. It's not a name, really. It's more of a warning. It means the empty voice, the hollow sound. Most people think voices are just sound, but they're more than that. They're memories, intent, presence. She tapped her temple. This thing, whatever it is, learns by listening. It doesn't speak at first. It waits. It listens for the moments you let your guard down, when you talk in your sleep, when you cry out in fear. when you whisper things you don't want anyone to hear, and then it starts using them. I said. She nodded. If it uses your voice, it already owns part of you. I asked her how she knew. She didn't answer right away, just walked over to one of the cabinets and pulled out a small, battered cassette tape. The label was faded, but I could make out a year, 1976. She handed me an old recorder, press play. At first, just static. Then a voice. A man's. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to go outside. It's cold out there. It's waiting. It has my mother's voice. It won't stop calling me. Then silence. Then a different voice. This time, it was the same man, but the tone was wrong. Lower. Calm. It's warm here, he said. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Just let me in. I stopped the tape. Miss Ray didn't look surprised. I've got dozens more like that, she said. Different people, different voices, same pattern. I asked what happened to them. She looked toward the window. Some left town. Some stopped talking. A few just faded. The voices got stronger. The people didn't. I asked if there was a way to stop it. She hesitated. There's no exorcism, if that's what you're thinking. It's not possession, not exactly. It's resonance. Echoes that find a place to stay. And the longer you ignore it, the deeper it roots itself. She picked up a notebook from the table, opened it to a page filled with symbols. Some of them matched Emma's drawings. Your friend, she said slowly, might not even know how much of herself she's already given away. I left with a bag of tapes, a stack of photocopied pages, and a warning. Don't speak to it if it uses your voice. Don't acknowledge it. Don't argue. The moment you answer back, it knows it has you. And as I walked home, I realized something else. Something she hadn't said out loud. If it already had part of me, how long before I started saying things I didn't remember? How long before Emma wasn't the only one changing? I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. Not anymore. Emma wasn't the same person I'd known. Something inside her had shifted. Something I couldn't reach through jokes or late-night talks. I needed to confront her. The first time I brought it up, she looked at me like I was the one who had changed, like I was the one imagining things. But then when I pressed harder, her defenses crumbled. She whispered, barely able to hold it together, "It's not just me anymore." I froze. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything I'd heard before. She swallowed hard and her eyes darkened. Sometimes I watched in my own eyes, but it's like I'm just a passenger, like someone else is driving. I didn't know how to respond. Then, slowly, she started to speak. But it wasn't just Emma anymore. Voices overlapped, layered on top of each other. It was disorienting. I heard her voice, soft and shaky. Then my mother's calm, steady tone, so familiar it made my skin crawl. Then the sharp, angry voice of my ex-boyfriend, accusing and cold. And beneath it all, a child's voice, the voice of my own younger self, whispering secrets I hadn't thought about in years. They all blended together into something impossible, something I could barely comprehend. Emma's eyes flickered, and for a moment, I felt like I was staring into an endless void. It was clear she wasn't just haunted. She was occupied. Days passed, and the voices grew louder, more insistent. Emma stopped responding to me like a person. She drifted through the halls, speaking to no one and everyone at once. And then one night, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she showed up at my door. Her face was pale, her eyes wild but focused. "I need you to come with me," she said. I hesitated, but something in her tone didn't give me a choice. She led me out into the night, the cold air biting at our skin. We walked in silence toward the woods on the edge of town, where no one usually went after dark. Then she stopped. "He wants to meet you," she said, voice a strange mix of fear and certainty. I looked into the trees, shadows stretching and twisting with the moonlight. The forest felt alive, waiting. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the silence. A slow, deep breath echoed from somewhere just beyond the trees. And then I heard it, my own voice, calling softly, inviting me deeper into the darkness. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. But it was. My name whispered on the wind, pulling me forward. Emma took my hand, but I wasn't sure if she was trying to protect me or if she was part of whatever was waiting in the shadows. The night stretched on, endless and cold, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about all of us, because if my own voice could be used like a key, what doors were waiting to be opened, and who would be left on the other side? Emma disappeared. One moment she was there, standing in front of me, fragile and fractured, and the next, she was gone. No warning, no note, just vanished into the air like a whisper, carried away by the wind. I searched everywhere, the places she loved, the spots where we had shared secrets, but all I found was silence. And then the voices started. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe the stress, the exhaustion getting to me, but it wasn't just in my head. When I was alone, quiet, the voices would come. Soft, faint, familiar. They whispered things only people close to me would know. Sometimes it was my mother's voice, gentle but questioning. Sometimes my father's, steady but concerned. Sometimes Emma's, the one I was trying to save, but distorted, distant, like a fading echo trapped somewhere unreachable. They didn't speak clearly, but the tone was always the same. Searching, watching, waiting. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that it was just the weight of loneliness pressing down. But then I noticed something else. My reflection, when I looked in the mirror, it didn't move quite right. It lagged behind me, a heartbeat too slow, a delayed shadow that didn't quite match my every move. At first, it was subtle, a twitch here, a blink there, but then it became impossible to ignore. I would lift my hand, and the reflection would hesitate before copying the motion. I would smile, and the mirror image would stay still, almost cold. It was like the part of me that was supposed to be there was fading away. One evening, I was on the phone with my mom. Her voice was warm, familiar, and for a moment it felt normal, like a lifeline back to safety. Then she paused and said something that stopped me cold. "Why are you imitating my voice?" I didn't understand at first. Imitating? I asked, my throat tightening. "Yes," she replied, voice trembling. "You don't sound like yourself. You sound like me, like someone else trying to be me." That's when the truth hit me. It wasn't just Emma anymore. It was spreading. Into me. Into us all. I felt it creeping inside, an invisible presence tightening its grip on my thoughts, my words, my very identity. I could feel my own voice shifting, changing, becoming something unfamiliar even to me. And then the dreams began. Or maybe they weren't dreams. Maybe they were something worse. I found myself standing in a vast darkness, a place without edges or walls. In the middle, a shape flickered, faceless, shifting like smoke in the wind. It was a shadow. It didn't speak with words. It spoke with voices. Every voice I had ever loved. Every voice that had ever shaped me. Every voice I had ever heard calling my name. They all came together in one terrible chorus. The shadow's voice was every one of them at once. Soft and cold, welcoming and empty. Then it said something I couldn't forget. All voices returned to the dark eventually. And in that moment, I knew the truth. There was no escaping this, no fighting it, because this was not just a presence taking over Emma. This was a force reclaiming what it believed belonged to it. The voices, the memories, the souls behind them all. And I was next. There was only one question left. How long before the voice I called my own slipped away? How long before I became just another echo, lost to the dark? Emma was never found. The police closed the case quickly. An unfortunate mental breakdown, they said. Stress, isolation, maybe even grief. They didn't see what I saw, didn't hear what I heard. But I couldn't let it go, because the voices didn't stop with Emma. They followed me, filling every quiet moment with whispers. In the stillness of my room, when the world felt like it should be silent, the voices rose again. Sometimes they were soft, almost comforting, like a memory brushing past. Other times, they were sharp, disjointed, fragmented conversations I had never had, or at least never remembered having. I started questioning everything. Was it really my own voice I was hearing? Or something else? Something using my words without my permission? Sometimes, before I even spoke aloud, I would hear my own voice whispering from the closet, whispering words I didn't recognize, words I didn't remember saying. That realization changed everything. The fear was no longer about Emma or what had happened to her. It was about me, about what was inside me now, about what was waiting to come next. I don't know if there's a way out of this. If there is, I haven't found it. All I know is this: be careful who you listen to. Not every voice is human. If you want to stay with me through the rest of this journey, if you want to uncover more stories like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Because sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones we can't explain, and the voices we don't expect to hear. Stay vigilant and listen closely,